Oh yeah. You're listening to the 70s Kiss podcast. And I'm your host, the plaster podcaster, Steve-O from Knoxville, Tennessee. This show is about Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. If you're looking for something else, you can just keep on knocking. So, what's happening, folks? It's been a while. You guys thought I was gone, didn't you? Well, I was just doing these podcasts for fun and on my own time. And I have time to do one today. And today I'm going to talk about me and my influence and how I became a Kiss fan. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to dedicate this episode to Eric Carr. So here's my story. So when I was young, my father was a musician. And he played in several bands. His father was a musician. His father was a musician, and on down the line. Uncles, cousins. We come out of the hills of Tennessee, and most of the music that my family endured and played was bluegrass and old-time music. And then my father, country music. And, you know, he was into the rock and roll of Elvis and Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis as well. So as a kid growing up, I had access to my father's music, and he was also an all-around musician. He played guitar, he played bass, played piano, just about anything he could put his hands on, he could play it. And so he was a major influence to me as a kid. And then all the people that would come around and see me would be like, oh, one day you're going to be like your father. You're going to grow up and be this great musician, you know. And as a kid, I'm like, how am I going to do this? You know, this doesn't seem, how did he do this, you know? So around that time, my dad and his bandmates became Christians, and they decided to start playing at church all the time. And this was a holiness Pentecostal church, which is a really energetic, wild environment. And if you've seen a lot of the black churches displayed on TV of how they are very energetic and wild like that, the Pentecostal church is like that in its entirety. So I went up to the preacher and said, hey, I want you to pray for me so God will give me the gift of music. And he did. And 2 or 3 weeks later, I guess, I was on stage, the church stage, playing drums with my father's band. So it worked. And been playing music ever since. But what happened is I played drums all the time with them. And as I was getting up into my teen years, I was hearing about these bands like Kiss, AC/DC, Rush at school from my friends. Because, you know, once you get around 11, 12 years old, you start experiencing the music thing, you know, most kids. So we lived in a ghetto and on Wilson Avenue. And I lived in this house that had this little alley in the side and real close to the next house. And then the next house had an alley real close to the next house and kind of on down the line like that. And the next door neighbor was a really big Leonard Skinner AC/DC fan. And whenever he would play his records, I mean, it was like right outside my window. And I would hear that all the time. And, you know, I was like, wow, this is rock and roll thing's pretty cool, you know. And then one day I hear this really loud music coming from like 3 houses down. And so me and my uncles, which were my mother's half brothers, they were like in my age area. We went down to the alley and followed the music to the house and stood there and looked up to the window, and this cat yells out the window, "What are you boys doing?" And we're like, "Oh, we're checking out this music. What is that?" He was like, "That's Kiss." And we're like, "Holy shit, that is badass. What is that?" And he's like, "Come on up here. Let me show you." So he starts pulling out all these pictures and these magazines. And of course, I'd already heard about this and at school and stuff. So I kind of already knew who Kiss was, but really didn't have the inside information. So he was giving us that, and he played us some of the music, explained to us what the deal was with them and everything. The whole thing that you did as a Kiss fan when you got with other Kiss fans, he was giving it to us. So I go home and I call my uncles, and I'm like, "Hey, this guy's talking about Kiss. I know you guys have a Kiss album or two. What do you have?" And they're like, "Well, we have Kiss Alive. You want to come over and listen to it?" So I would walk over the hill and stay all night, and we would look at magazines and stuff and listen to Kiss at their house. Now, our parents were really heavy into this religion thing, and at the time, Kiss was in the news for being devil worshippers and Kings of Satan service, that whole bit. And it was really strong, kind of like Ozzy Osbourne when that happened to him. They really believed it, and, they set us down many times telling us that, Kiss was going to steal our soul and all this stuff, And we just laughed, because kind of the way we looked at them were like comic book characters. We had just come out of the Superman, Spider-Man, G.I. Joe, that whole thing, I think Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica was happening around that time. And, we just kind of looked at Kiss like that. But it didn't matter because, they had their mindset that they were going to protect us from this. And, now looking back on it, understand that that's exactly what they were trying to do, even though they were wrapped up into the religion a little too much, in my opinion. But they were really trying to protect us. And because there's a lot of things, me now knowing what I know and experience what I've experienced in the music business, there's a lot of things out there that you can get into and that are very weird like that. And so, like I said, they were trying to protect us. But at that time, it was kind of devastating to us because it was something that we really wanted to do that was cool. So, we had to hide our albums. We had to hide our books. We couldn't hang posters on the wall. We couldn't wear those t-shirts at home. Anything that we did, we had to hide it. So let's say that one of us got a Kiss t-shirt. We wanted to wear it to school. Well, we had to take the shirt and hide it, roll it up and hide it until we got to school, and then go into like the bathroom and change our shirt and then change it before I got home. So it was really that bad. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it was really that bad. So my mother probably broke my album collection. I had went to the local stores and bought the used Kiss records for like 50 cents to 25 cents, to where I had the collection. I had the very first album until the latest, and sometimes I would get an allowance and go to the store and buy one that was new, that I could unwrap and get the stickers out of the album cover and everything. But my mom would find those and break them, bust them, tear them up and stuff. So around this time, I started, wanting to come home from church and bring my drums home and not really play anymore, because I'd done like 4 or 5 years at church playing the revivals and all that stuff, playing drums with my dad and them. And I wanted to adventure into this rock and roll thing. Now, before the church thing, my father was into the country music, the Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis rock and roll, all that stuff. So he had albums. He still had these albums, and he had a really nice stereo system. And when he would leave, I would get into his albums and explore into the Beatles and all of that stuff. And my dad was also a studio engineer. So there was a recording studio in the basement or downtown in the city. He had several of them. And I would get into those studios by myself, and, he would have soundtracks of music that he would, or albums and stuff that he had on the reel-to-reels, and I would get in there and turn that stuff on and listen to it. So I was really influenced a lot by my father already with rock and roll, country music, and bluegrass. So I brought my drums home and got a couple of Kiss records, and had went down to one of the little places called the Arcade, I believe it was, downtown, where they had all this used stuff, albums to record players, all kinds of stuff, speakers. And I swindled this school record player that had the top, with the speaker built in the front, to where I could play my records at home. And I didn't have to bother my father's stuff. So I set my 62 Slingerland drums up, and original calfskin heads that were badass drums. And I'd sit there and I would play, to these Kiss albums. So I would forget, leave them out, come home, they would be broke in the trash. It was ridiculous. So, they had the thing to where you could order the 12 records for $1 back then. And so what I did is I ordered 12 records. I'd always get a couple of Kiss records, and then I'd get like Captain and Tennille, not Cool and Gang, but Village People, Peter Frampton, and some of these other people that were out at the time, Bee Gees. And I would have those records out sitting in a thing to where when my mom would come in and look through them, she would see those and wouldn't see Kiss. And she wouldn't do anything to those albums. So, and I would take the albums and hide them. So, but it got so bad that I ended up having to get 8 tracks, which I'll tell you about that in a minute. But one of the stories is so funny. Kiss released the solo albums, and they must have had overproduction on them, because the solo albums brand new were like $2 and on sale at the stores at all times. So me and my little brother got our allowance, and we walked down to Howard Brothers, and there they were. They had the solo albums on display, $2.95, I think is what it was. So I told my brother, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get Ace Frehley, and you get Gene Simmons, and you make sure that you don't let Mom see it. Okay? And he agreed. He was only like 5 years old. And we get the albums, and we go back to the house. I get in the house first, and I'm able to secure my Ace album in the hiding place. So my brother comes in late after me, and my mother sees my brother, and he says, "Hey, Mom, look what I got." And she's like, "What'd you spend your money on?" He goes, "I've got a Gene Simmons album, Mom." And she just grabbed it out of his hands and just busted it over her knee. He started crying. I'll never forget that. It was just, it one of those moments. And so it wasn't long after that, I was going down to all the stores. There was this place that turned into Backdoor Records, which I did an episode on with Lionel Baker. And I would go into their shop, and they had like real black and white photos and stuff that you could buy. And I was getting 8 tracks from them. And what happened was, where my dad had been working on this house, our room had a hole in the sheetrock behind our bunk bed. And we had a blanket that hung down behind the bunk bed, so that covered that hole. So I was take those 8-track tapes and hide them in that sheetrock, in that hole, so she couldn't find them and break them. And went that way for a little while. And finally, the Sex Pistols came out. And when the Sex Pistols came out, I mean, they made headlines like nobody's business, and with all the stuff that was going on with them. So my dad comes to me and he says, look, you can like Kiss, you can like any of the bands you want to like, but do not let me catch you with a Sex Pistols album. So that cleared my way, and I believe he pretty much ironed that out with my mother, and I didn't have any more Kiss problems because of the Sex Pistols. But so we go on, and and I start a couple of bands when I get into my 15, 16-year-old years. And one day I decided just to sell my drums and buy a guitar. I wanted to be a guitar player. I really, really wanted to be Ace Frehley, when I was a drummer. Peter Criss was cool. I could play drums. I could pretty much play Peter Criss stuff. It was not that hard. And but my soul was set on being a guitar player. So I got me a guitar. I went down to the pawn shop and had found another guitar which was shaped just like the Les Paul copy. It was white and stuff, and got that, and that was cool. It was a Hondo 2, and I played that thing for a long time. And a couple of years after that, in 84, I got another guitar and got a little better or whatever. But in 1980, my grandmother died, and there was I experienced some trauma with that, and my mother and father bought me a brand new Ibanez Les Paul copy. It was way nicer than your actual Les Paul, copy. The Ibanez was its own brand, and they were actually getting sued by Gibson because they weren't so nice. But it was a really cool guitar, and I spent a lot of time in the bedroom with marijuana and incense, learning that trade, and with that guitar. So later on in life, I got into these bands, a lot of local bands in the 80s. And around 88, I ended up going on the road playing top 40 music, traveling across America, playing in like all the Hyatt Regencies and, just traveling. And so, in a sense, I made it. I had made it. I'd done what I set out to do. I was a traveling guitar player, and I was getting paid. And I was on the road and playing a lot of places in front of a lot of people. And through an agency, and then, that led to another band, and then that led to another band. And, pretty much that's what happened. But with me, how I became a guitar player and musician was because of Kiss and my father. But one of the cool stories was Eric Carr. So during the Animalize tour, I was working at a music store, and the music store was a Hamer dealer. And I talked about this in the Bobby Ward episode, but because he was with me. But this is really cool. So I'll repeat it in a little more detail. So basically, one day at work, the owner of the store was on the phone with a representative of Hamer Guitars, and Kiss was in town the next day. And Crocus, and maybe Kiss as well, were using some Hamer guitars. And so the representative asked my boss if we wanted some passes to the show. So my boss didn't care about Kiss at all. You know, he's like, "You want these passes?" And I was like, "Hell yeah." You know, VIP. And so I called up my buddy Bobby Ward and I said, "Hey, I got 2 passes to the Kiss show." He didn't believe me. I'm like, "Dude, I'm telling you, I got 2 VIP passes backstage." So this was the very first time I'd ever been backstage at any show. So anything like that. So I pick up my buddy the next day, and we go down to the Freedom Hall Civic Center, and we're walking around. We got our passes on. We go up to the thing, get our passes, and it's like blowing our minds because we have not just a backstage pass, after show pass, but we have a VIP pass, which allows us pretty much to do anything. So we go into the Coliseum, and they're having sound check, and they're setting up for the show, and there's a couple other people in there with passes too, and Paul Stanley's walking around. I'll never forget, he had this half leather jacket on with Indian fringe hanging off the sleeves. Really cool jacket. And he looks over at us and he sees us over there, and he walks over, starts talking to us. And you know, a couple of guys are asking for his autograph. Girl asked for his autograph, and pretty much everybody was just like pulling their ticket out of their pocket, and he was just signing the ticket. And when he got to me, I said, "Hey, Paul, you know, what's going on with Ace Frehley? When's he going to release Frehley's comment? I keep hearing about this, and do you have any information on that?" And he looks at me real smart and he goes, "I don't know. Why don't you give him a call?" Just a complete smart ass. And at that time, you know, I had been through so much crap over the rock band Kiss as a child. And here I am standing in front of one of my mentors and one of my superheroes. And I finally get to meet him, and he's a dick. He was a dick. So I ripped up the ticket and threw it on the ground. I said, "I don't want your fucking autograph. You're an asshole." And I walked away. And he was signing my buddy's ticket at that time. And my buddy gets his ticket and he runs over to me. He's like, "Hey man, be cool." You know, I guess what saved us was there was several other people standing there which laughed when he made his comment. But it took his eye off me for a minute. So Bobby walks over to me and says, "Hey man, be cool. They're going to throw us out of here. We got VIP passes. The show's not even started. You're going to get us thrown out." So we kind of disappeared for a minute, you know, and went outside, was looking around. So the show starts. We come back in, and we're backstage. Actually backstage before the first band starts. And we meet this bass tech named Romeo for Gene Simmons. And we tell Romeo, because we were supposed to ask for him anyway, from Hamer Guitars. So we tell him that we're the representatives from Hamer Guitars through the music store, and that we're there to see the show. And was there anything that he could give us, like a drumstick or some picks, something we can hang up in the store, you know? He's like, "Oh, hell yeah, sure, come up here." So the lights are still on, and me and Bobby walks up onto the stage where Gene Simmons' bass stuff is, and Romeo opens this drawer and it is like crammed full of Gene Simmons pics. I mean, this drawer was pretty big and it was nothing but pics. He says, hold out both of your hands. And he gave me like, I don't know, 400 or 500 pics. This huge amount of pics. So all of our friends that knew us were on the barricade down on the floor. They could see us up there and they were yelling, hey, give us a pic. And I just looked at Bobby and winked my eye and I said, watch this. So as we're walking off the stage, Romeo says, hey, do you guys want to go back and meet the band? They're in the dressing room getting ready. And I just kind of took a breath and I looked at Bobby and I was like, shook my head, no. And he goes, no. I was like, no. I said, we'll just wait. We'll let them do the thing. We know they got to get on stage. He goes, no, it's all right. I was like, well, because I had just told Paul Stanley to fuck off. So I didn't want to take any chances of getting us thrown out of the place, So we chose not to go back there, which was probably stupid. We should have went back and, at least we could have met Gene Simmons at the time. So the show starts and these people see us walking out of the crowd and they're like, hey man, you got one of those pics? So I started selling these pics, man, because somebody offered me $20 for one. And I was like, holy shit, I've got, hundreds of these things in my pockets. I put a bunch in my pockets and then Bobby put some in his pockets and that's how many pics we had. And, so we were selling these things for like $5, $10, $15, $20 a piece. And, so we're walking around backstage and they had this big catering area back there and it was full of beer and booze. And they had Heineken on the ice, and we were back there eating steak, drinking all of their Heineken, and just getting wasted. We're living it up. We're backstage at Kiss. This is badass. So the stage manager walks up to us and grabs. It was either me or Bobby. Okay, grabs us by the arm. He goes, "Your passes have just expired." And walks us out to the side of the stage into the crowd, So that was the end of our backstage experience during the Animalized tour. So Romeo had told us, though, after the show, there was going to be a private party at Blake's Lounge at the Holiday Inn where the Kiss was staying. So we told him we would go. We'd be there. For some reason, me and Bobby got separated. I don't know why. And I can't remember who I rode down there with. But there was 2 or 3 people sitting at the table. And I think one guy's name was Kevin True. But they had this big long table. And with several tables put together. And it just made a big long table. Well, Paul Stanley and some of his crew people were at one end of it. And he was sitting at the head of the table. And on the other end of the table, it was me and my friends. And I was sitting at the head of the table on that end. And Paul Stanley remembered me from earlier that day. And he kept glaring at me down this table, So Eric Carr walks over and goes, hey, what's up, guys? Just out of the blue. And he says, y'all care if I sit here? And we're like, no, man, sit down. He goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, we'll party. I'll buy some margaritas, some drinks and stuff. He goes, under one condition. And we're like, what? He says, we don't talk about Kiss. And I was like, oh, man, He goes, no, I'm just kidding, man. We can talk about anything y'all want to talk about. So he sits there and he orders us drinks, and I tell him the story, what happened earlier today about Paul, because Paul was staring at us, and I guess Eric Carr noticed it, and he kept waving at Paul, grinning and laughing, and I told him what happened, I told him to fuck off, and so Eric's like, don't worry about it, man. There was a guy fell from the roof that was on the crew a show or two before, and he's probably upset about that. Just don't worry about it. So we'd sit there and talked, and since, my question was about Ace Frehley to Paul Stanley, Eric took it on himself to tell us the lowdown on Ace the rest of the night while we sit there drinking margaritas. And it was hilarious. He told us that Ace had shot up his neighbor's house with a machine gun, and that his wife had got busted for drugs in a drugstore or something. They were just all kinds. I can't remember everything that he said, but it was just all kinds of crazy stuff, man. It was really cool to be able to sit there with an actual KISS member and have these conversations. When I was a kid, hiding those 8-tracks in the wall, I never thought for 1 minute that day would come that I would be sitting there at a private party with KISS. It was Paul Stanley, a bunch of their crew people, looked like maybe some of their record company people. It was Eric Carr, the guitar player, Bruce Kulick. Gene wasn't there. He was, I guess, up in his room with his long line of girls. And some of the guys in Crocus. And then the rest of the bar was full of old people. And they put this sign on the door that said private KISS party. You couldn't get in there if you didn't have a pass. And then you had all these regulars that was already in there, these old folks. And but that was a pretty cool experience with Eric Carr, because here I am, a fan. You always hear these stories about meeting your heroes and them turning out to be dicks and assholes, and that kind of happened to me. But Eric Carr, came to my rescue. He made it all better. And I told him about some of this. I told him about how my parents were and how they destroyed my collection and all that stuff, and he just thought it was crazy. But anyway, just thought I would make this episode today for Eric. Rest in peace, and rock and roll.
So that's a wrap. Well, that's it, folks. Until next time, this is the Plaster Podcaster saying, I'm out. Oh, yeah.
Look, it's rock and roll.